I'm Gail. Don Lewis was our daddy.
I'm Linda, and we miss our dad.
I'm Donna. We need to know what happened to our father.
I'm Ann. All we're asking is justice for Don.
Don Lewis mysteriously disappeared in 1997. His family deserves justice. Do you know who did this or if Carole Baskin was involved?
A $100,000 reward has been funded. You can call the tip line at 646-450-6530.
Or call our office at 800-LITIGATE. Thank you.
And welcome to Law and Crime Now, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. Now, that ad you just saw ran during Carole Baskin's Dancing with the Stars debut. Carole Baskin, of course, came to become a household name after being featured in the hit Netflix series Tiger King. Now, she herself has been theorized, even accused of killing and disposing of the body of her former husband, Don Lewis, who went missing back in 1997, although neither she nor anyone has been criminally charged. Well, I got a chance to sit down with the guy you saw in that ad, John Phillips, who was representing the family of Don Lewis, and I asked what led to the family's decision to have this ad being run. Take a look. Put that ad out at that time.
We knew Carole Baskin was going to have essentially a captive nation during Dancing with the Stars and get to tell her narrative in full as she wanted to tell it. The problem is she's had that narrative for 23 years and the family hasn't. And so the purpose was so that they could get counter messaging out. Look, the scales of justice can balance if both sides get to talk. So they wanted their opportunity and had to pay for time to get it and got it.
You got to tell me, was some of the motivation to get under her skin a little bit? I mean, this was her big national debut, and yet she came forward and said, listen, I saw this ad. I was told about this ad before I went on. She says it didn't bother her enough to do anything about it. It didn't really bother her. What do you make of that reaction?
She said it didn't bother her, but got a 4 out of 10, a 4 out of 10, a 3 out of 10, and was rendered speechless. Now, I don't know if that's because she was tired or a poor dancer or what, but I've never seen Carole Baskin speechless. And there she was trying to talk to Tyra and couldn't get the words out. So it is what it is.
So you think that was a result of the ad?
I don't know. It doesn't matter. The fact is everybody's talking about Don Lewis today, along with how bad of a dancer she was. But everybody's talking about Don Lewis today. And if we hadn't aired the ad, it'd have been just a forgotten part of the story.
All right. Homicide prosecutor Bernardo Villalona joins me now. Bernardo, good to see you. A lot to break down here. So you just heard John Phillips. He basically said this was a way to keep Don in the discussion. It actually resulted in, when I spoke to him, people bringing tips forward. There's even experts who came forward, said we'll provide free advice to you. You heard him say that, this was the motivation behind it. I'm curious what you think about that rationale, and do you think it bothered Baskin? I mean, you heard what John Phillips just said.
Look, thank you for having me, Jesse. Jesse, I think it was an excellent idea by the attorney for the family bringing up this commercial, especially since it aired prime time. And when people were watching for Baskin to, this rave all behind her. So they were paying attention. So the one thing is that, one, there is no statute of limitation when it comes to charging a homicide. So even though this happened 23 years ago, they can still bring homicide charges if there is sufficient evidence to believe that the prosecutor can get a conviction on the homicide charges, that they can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Because there are so many theories that are out there, and there has been a lot of different motives that have been set out. But the reality is that theories and motive do not equal evidence. That alone is not enough to convict the person. So by bringing out that commercial, they, one, put light again on Mr. Lewis, who passed away 23 years ago and seems to be forgotten. Two, it puts pressure on the prosecution, on the DA's office to actually look into the case, as well as law enforcement. Three, law enforcement was not going to put this commercial on for that family, right, since it is a cold case. So much was accomplished by this commercial going forward.
And we can't forget that Don Lewis's family and Baskin are embroiled in this litigation. They're suing her and others not for money at this point, but to get more information, to compel them to provide information on what happened to Don Lewis. Now, Baskin filed a motion to dismiss, saying that these claims are stale. They've already been settled. The parties had stipulated to settle a lot of these claims. So here's Phillips' response to that motion to dismiss. Are you concerned that your lawsuit might be thrown out?
We're not concerned. So there's lawsuits for money and lawsuits for equity, for information. And they are rare, but we felt that we wanted to get the information first before we filed our big multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The problem is, since then, since I held a press conference and said, please stop defaming the family, please stop talking about this until we sit down, she's done daily YouTube videos further defaming everybody. Ann McQueen, Don's longtime assistant, has been defamed and accused of everything from $500,000 in fraud to being involved with his death, even though in 1998, Carole said those things and then wrote a notarized apology saying she took it all back. So you've just got to, a judge is going to allow us to depose her, whether it's on the defamation, whether it's on intentional infliction of emotional distress, the fraud, the collusion, or the murder or manslaughter. We're going to get her deposition. The question is when and what counts we have pending at the time. They've also allowed us to amend our complaint. It's common for a motion to dismiss to be filed. We're going to allege more facts this time.
Bernarda, is he right? How is this going to play out? Because remember, this lawsuit is to get information that can be used later on to file a lawsuit for monetary damages or if criminal charges are filed. How's this going to play out?
So, Jesse, one thing about bringing a civil lawsuit is that you have depositions. You are sworn to tell the truth and you're being questioned and you're providing answers. Now, with that, you have provided sworn testimony. That sworn testimony can be used against Ms. Baskin for any future, whether it's a future lawsuit or a criminal investigation. Because if I were the prosecutor or part of the investigation in this case, I will quickly get the transcripts of that deposition and see where can I poke holes? Where are the leads for me to consider to continue going forward?
And, you know, I asked John Phillips, maybe does he have more information than the rest of us on what really happened? Here was his answer. Does Don Lewis's family, do you have a theory about what actually happened to Don?
We do. So, you know, when a hurricane comes, I don't know if you've seen the spaghetti models, and they come and they're just like spaghetti going all over the state of Florida, particularly. And that's what we have here. We've got a spaghetti model of the meat grinder and a spaghetti model of the septic tank and the freezer that Trish brought up on 48 Hours. All of these theories, but at the core, there's one traceable hurricane, right? And it's that power of attorney. Why would somebody commit fraud on a power of attorney that requires somebody to be dead or disappeared to use it? So again, we don't know if Carole had anything to do with his death, but her waving around days after his death this fraudulent power of attorney concerns everybody and changed the course of everybody's financial affairs and continues in daily defamation to be uttered by, to utterly insult, defame, slander, and libel innocent parties with this daily diary of Carole rehashing things from 1997 and 1998.
Oh, you have to tell us, is there something, some piece of evidence, some piece of information that you have gotten a hold of that you maybe can't share right now, but maybe help support this theory, support this story?
There's a lot. There's a lot of evidence that we're going to, obviously, it's in no lawyer's advantage to play their cards openly in the public. But we have lots of cards. But, you know, the power of attorney is publicly accessible. People should really take a look at that and wonder why. The will is the same thing. There's just so many documents, so many lies, even about how Carole and Don met. Everybody knows on Netflix, she said that she was walking down Nebraska Avenue and Don picked her up. But in her first marriage custody battle, she told a judge, the lawyer asked, will you have anything to tell the court about how you met? And she said, we were doing real estate deals together, and that's how we met. So everything from the time they met to the time he died has had inconsistent stories.
Bernardo, they have a theory of what happened to Don and clearly more information that they haven't shared at this point. What does that tell you, and what can we expect?
So what that tells me is that definitely there's more investigation taking place and that they're waiting to get enough evidence to be able to put a case forward. Because this is like all these pieces that we are learning are like pieces of a puzzle. You need all the pieces together in order to complete the puzzle. And once you get that, then you can present it whether to a judge or to a grand jury in order to get an indictment. But I don't know whether this family will ever get justice, because theories, like I said, and motives, that alone doesn't equal evidence. While that can assist as circumstantial evidence and motive for why a person committed a crime, it doesn't give you evidence that that person actually did it. And that is what's lacking in this case. But I'm going to stay tuned, because let's see if they get enough tips or people who step forward with information.
Or if they run another ad on Dancing with the Stars, if Carole Baskin makes it that far. Listen, there's a lot more that I interviewed John Phillips about. You can actually watch the full interview if you turn over to our YouTube page. But I do want to switch gears and focus on a quick update in the Lori Vallow Daybell case. Of course, that Idaho mother who's facing multiple charges in connection with the death of her two children, JJ and Tylee. Well, unlike the defense counsel for her husband, Chad, she does not oppose the prosecution's motion to have her tried together with her husband. So, Bernardo, this is interesting. Chad doesn't want to be tried together with Lori. Lori's not objecting to it. What's going on here?
Well, first off, the judge is going to have to make the decision as to whether they should be tried together. As long as neither one of them are pointing the finger at each other, then they can be tried together, because you still have the same evidence that's going to be put forward for either one of them if they had separate trials. But what we will need to know, well, what the judge will have to know from the beginning before they make a decision as to have two different juries or two different trials, is whether they're going to point the finger at each other. Because what you don't want is for one defense attorney to serve as a second prosecutor in that courtroom in order to convict either one of them. So that's what you want to avoid, because if not, the case will be overturned on appeal and sent back for a new trial.
Well, there are a lot of people who are speculating at this point who are saying, oh, Lori's turning on Chad. That's what that means, because they really do have, they could argue that what happened here in two separate ways. I mean, her children were found on his property. You can kind of get the sense of how you might have two conflicting narratives. Now, Bernardo, let me just turn your attention to one more motion. Lori won this motion to have, the court allows her now to wear street clothes for upcoming hearings, meaning she doesn't have to be in her jail garb, but the judge says that these clothes have to be solely provided by her. Now, for a woman who reportedly cares so much about what she looks like in court, I'm not surprised, but what do you make of this? We have about 30 seconds.
Well, one thing, it's a strategy, because every time the cameras are inside of the courtroom and you don't want to be portrayed in jail clothing, because if you're portrayed in jail clothing, you're giving off the impression that, one, she's already been convicted.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And look, we're going to see what happens, because there's some hearings in Chad Daybell's case for next month and in November. And we know that her trial, she has two trials, one in March and one in January of next year. We're going to take a break. When we come back, some crazy story that we have to bring your attention to if you haven't seen it. Be back in a minute. And welcome back, everybody. You know, we cover a number of just absolutely awful deaths here on the network, but what I'm about to go into could be one of the worst. Authorities discovered the body of a 12-year-old boy in a horrendous condition. The boy's father and his fiancée have been arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including criminal homicide. I want to turn right now to the local DA, who went into more details about this. I warn you right now, this is disturbing.
Our detectives responded and they found Maxwell Schallenberger, age 12, deceased in his own bed. He was fully naked. His body was covered in his own human waste. This little boy, in his bedroom, he had not one toy, no furniture aside from the bed where he died. This little boy had nothing other than the bed. The bed itself was soaked, was covered in fecal matter and the child's human waste. When detectives lifted the mattress, looked under the frame, they found piles of moldy feces. The floor surrounding the bed was covered in fecal matter. The bedroom itself contained no bathroom, contained no area for this little boy to relieve himself, other than the bed where he died. This child could not escape that bedroom. When our detectives examined the door, they found exterior eyelet hooks on the outside frame, locks, latches. When they went on the inside of the bedroom had windows, but they were entirely restricted. Those windows had louvered shutters screwed into the window frames themselves. The blinds, the curtains were duct taped to the window. That little boy in his suffering could not see out. The community, even if it knew to look for him, could not see in. And that child died, suffering entirely alone in the darkness.
Okay, Bernarda, let's get involved in this. I want to start off with what we heard from the DA because she wouldn't really elaborate more on a motive here, even though it should be noted that there were other children living in the house who were fine. It should be noted that this boy, many people didn't even know he existed. He was shut off from the world. There was never even a Child and Youth Services investigation into what was going on. At this point, there was a question about why it took so long from discovery of his body to him ultimately, to these two people ultimately being arrested. We're not getting a ton of details at this point. What does that tell you?
So, Jesse, well, one, I used to be a prosecutor in Philadelphia. I was a prosecutor in Philadelphia for 3 years, so I am familiar with Lebanon County. So, one thing that when you're dealing with a child at the age of 12, and you're looking to do an autopsy on him, it's that it takes a lot of time to do that autopsy because they have to do a lot of examinations in terms of toxicology. And what takes time is really if they have to do an examination of the brain, because an examination of the brain can take weeks up to months to get a final conclusion as to what could have happened in terms of any brain damage.
The autopsy did reveal blunt force trauma, malnutrition, complications from starvation. Now, if all of this is true and these two people are responsible, one of the questions the DA had to answer was, well, this is prime for the death penalty, right? And she said, no, it actually doesn't meet those factors. How on earth is that possible that if they did this, this wouldn't be death penalty eligible?
So, Jesse, I am concerned or curious as to why, because in reading the factors for the death penalty, it does meet it because one, the child was under 12 years old, and two, the child was tortured. And those are two of the factors that can be taken into account to determine whether they can face the death penalty. However, what it may be is that the mitigating factors in here is that these parents don't have a criminal record. And since that serves as a mitigating factor.
Maybe, because she didn't answer that question about the criminal record beforehand, and you might be onto something. I wish we had more time to talk about it. I want to follow this case, but before we leave this, just a few more words from the DA. Watch.
Children are the most haunting for our community, but also for our investigators. Max Schallenberger existed. I will not call this living, and I never will. He existed in a state of perpetual suffering. He existed in the most deplorable, the foulest, the most heinous of human conditions. He remained starved, isolated, and locked away until the moment of his death.
All right, it's a case that we're going to continue to follow, and that brings us now to Ghislaine Maxwell, another case that we've been following. Again, she is currently locked up in federal custody, awaiting a trial next year on federal sex crimes and perjury charges. We have a few updates. Bernarda, first, a woman named Jennifer Arroz filed a lawsuit under the New York Child Victims Act, alleging that Maxwell recruited her when she was 14 years old to be sexually abused by Epstein. What does this mean? What kind of lawsuit is this?
Suit is a civil lawsuit. It's not criminal charges. It's a civil lawsuit where this person, this victim, is seeking damages from Ghislaine. So one thing is that because New York enacted this law, that it doesn't matter how long ago that this sexual abuse took place, you can file charges, you can file a complaint, you can sue the individual responsible for having sexually assaulted you, as long as it's done before August of 2021.
And let me also turn your attention to another lawsuit, apparently filed on behalf of someone named Jane Doe. A judge has halted that civil lawsuit against Maxwell pending the outcome of her criminal case. And the court had said, you know, this could be prejudicial to Maxwell because she might be in a position where how does she defend herself in the civil arena, providing a deposition when she has the Fifth Amendment right not to self-incriminate. So is this the right decision for the judge? Because the criticism is the truth is not getting out there. The details are not getting out there. That case is being halted.
So, Jesse, actually, this is quite common in any kind of criminal trial if there's any civil lawsuits. Because number one, the person is entitled to their constitutional rights. So you can't do anything that will prejudice their right to get a fair trial. But two, when it comes to a criminal case that's similar with that attached to a civil case, is that discovery has to be turned over. So you don't want to turn over your discovery in a criminal case to a civil attorney so that can get out there and people are aware of what's going on. But also, you don't want to prejudice the defendant. You know, you don't want the media attention to give a bad light. So it's
look,
quite
I'll
common.
say this much, it's just not looking good for Ghislaine Maxwell at this point.
No.
Bernarda, thank you so much. Everyone out there, until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you then.